The 2023 NASCAR Cup Series playoffs have arrived. Darlington Raceway, the Lady in Black, is hosting the opening race, one of the crown jewel events, the Cookout Southern 500. The mission is simple for everyone in the playoffs: win the race and advance to the next round. If you're out of the playoffs, you still want to win this historic event like Eric Jones did last year in the famous 43 car. However, you must race the racetrack. 10 playoff drivers finished outside the top 10. 9 cautions were given last year, 8 earlier this year in the 400-mile race in the spring. Now, Alex, do you anticipate the non playoff drivers will be more aggressive than the playoff drivers in this race?
I don't know if they'll be more aggressive. I think they just don't care about the playoffs, so they're just gonna be racing as they have been all year and as they normally do in the playoffs. And this is a race you could see a surprise winner. We've seen Regan Smith win this race before in the 78 car, and last year we had Eric Jones win. But because this is a big race of attrition, it's about survival. Because this is a long race, it's probably the hardest track on the schedule. So I mean, these non-playoff guys, they probably have a chance, but also I don't think they necessarily are going to be more aggressive. They're just going to be about the same as they always are.
I think I'd kind of have to agree. I'd say that the non-playoff drivers, obviously, they don't care about the playoffs, and they're going to be in it for themselves and maybe helping out a teammate. But I think that in terms of how they race versus compared to the playoff drivers, I think that the playoff drivers do have to play it a little bit more cautious to be able to make it later in the race and finish the race, and maximize their points. Whereas the non-playoff guys are simply going for the win. So I think that we could see a little bit of a difference in how the two race.
Definitely. And now, if we rewind to last year, Michael McDowell, Brad Keselowski, and Bubba Wallace all finished in the top 10. However, none were in the playoffs. Now, this season, all 3 are in the playoffs. McDowell and Wallace are below the cut line this weekend, and Keselowski is only 10 points ahead. Now, Keselowski has won the Southern 500 in 2018, and RFK has won 3 of the last 5 with Chris Buescher. Is Keselowski a favorite for the weekend? And do McDowell or Bubba have any shot at moving above the cut line? Amanda, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Kozlowski definitely has been stronger this year even than before. So I think that he could be a possible favorite. RFK looks strong enough to do this. And yeah, I think out of the 3 that you mentioned, Kozlowski is probably the favorite out of those 3.
I don't think Keselowski is the favorite in general, but of the 3 you mentioned, absolutely. Between McDowell, Bubba Wallace, and Keselowski. Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's the best shot of those 3. But of the field, I think RFK still has a ways to go before they catch the Joe Gibbs Racing Toyotas and the 2 Hendrick cars that made the playoffs. But RFK has come a long way. It's been kind of remarkable to watch because last year they were awful, quite frankly, until the playoffs started and Chris Buescher got a win at Bristol. Yeah, I think RFK, they could compete for like a top 10, maybe a top 5 this weekend. I don't think they'll be in for the win unless a bunch of crazy stuff happens like it did last year.
Yeah, and now if we take a look at 2 drivers who are below the cut line, we have Kevin Harvick and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now, Ricky won the Daytona 500, but since the win has only 2 top 5s and 7 top 10s, the last of which was at Pocono. Kevin Harvick has 6 top 5s and 12 top 10s, and scored a second place finish here in the spring. Alex, if both drivers fail to win at Darlington, is the rest of the round of 16 an uphill battle?
Well, for Ricky Stenhouse Jr., absolutely, because they are definitely in the worst position of anyone. I think they are by far the least likely to advance of anyone, I believe, of all the 16 drivers. I think they're going to need a win, quite frankly, to advance. They have more playoff points than Bubba Wallace, for example, but I just don't see them having the pace compared to everyone else. They could maybe sneak their way in if there's a bunch of mechanical issues and crashes in each of the 3 races and they survive. But I don't. I think for them, they have the hardest battle upcoming for them. But Kevin Harvick is an interesting one because in my playoff grid I made for my podcast, I have him out in the first round, and that's just because Stewart Haas Racing's been very inconsistent, and I just don't trust them. But with Kevin Harvick, if anyone can advance without a win, it's probably him because he's just very consistent. I just have concerns with this overall team and how they're able to navigate through these playoffs.
Yeah, I'd have to agree completely that, especially on your point that Harvick and consistency go together pretty well, so that he could easily be the one to make it in on points and be able to advance that way without a win. Whereas Trackhouse aren't the most reliable, the most consistent team. So I think that, yeah, it it could be it could be definitely it will definitely be an uphill battle if Ricky Stenhouse doesn't manage to pull out a win early on here.
Definitely, and now we have 7 drivers entering the playoffs with only 1 win. This includes Christopher Bell, who is in 7th in points, Ross Chastain at 8th, Tyler Reddick in 10th, Joey Logano at 11th, Ryan Blaney 12th, Michael McDowell in 13th, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in 14th place. Now, Bell, Chastain, and Logano made the championship 4 last year. Reddick has never gotten out of round 1. Blaney seems to be either fast and up front or stuck mid pack. Starting with you, Amanda, do any of these drivers seem like worthy championship 4 contenders?
My obvious pick is going to be Logano out of that list, reigning championship um, Cup Series champion. But then also, I think a sneaky one, his teammate Ryan Blaney. I think that he actually had a great, well, not great, but like pretty good performance last year in the playoffs, and I think some bad luck definitely fell on him and contributed to him not making that final four, and some driver error. But yeah, obviously I'm going to pick Logano. I'll pick Blaney, and if I had to pick a third in that list, I would pick Michael McDowell just because for experience sake.
Wow.
Yeah.
Michael McDowell, that's bold. I'm actually going to completely disagree with you just for statistical reasons because Joey Logano has never made the championship 4 in an odd year. He makes it every other year in the even years, and it's an odd year. Team Penske's just very off this year. If between the Penske guys, if one of them were to make it, it would be Logano, but just because of that trend, I can't say he's going to make it. For me, of the guys you mentioned, Isha, I would look at Christopher Bell as a potential championship 4 driver. He made it last year. He's been kind of sneaky quiet. I think he's a bit more consistent running top 10, top 5. I'd also look at Tyler Reddick as a potential. But again, I think he's going to have to make it through the first round because last year he didn't do that. And other than that, I don't really see any of these guys as championship 4 guys. I would look at Christopher Bell the most, though, for sure.
All right, and now with those conflicting choices, let's look at some of the favorites in the playoffs. The top 4 seeds are Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, William Byron, and Chris Buescher. Nobody thought we'd be saying Chris Buescher be the 4th seed in the playoffs, but Buescher is the only one not to win at Darlington yet, but appears to be the driver to beat. Now, only 15 points between the 4 of them. Who do you see as the favorite to lead the points leaving Darlington? Amanda, starting with you.
It's tough because obviously Chris Buescher has been on such a roll, but I wouldn't pick him. If we go for experience, obviously I'm gonna pick Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin, and then William Byron just has kind of had a really strong year, and seems to be able to capitalize on a lot of opportunities. So, and kind of be the first to he's kind of leading the field in terms of figuring out different tracks and that kind of thing quickly. So I think honestly I'll pick William Byron out of all of those.
I'm going to go with Martin Truex Jr. will be leading the points after Darlington. This is one of his best tracks. I know Byron won here earlier this year, but I think he won here earlier this year. If he wasn't, I apologize. But Truex, this is one of his best tracks, I believe, and Denny Hamlin also is really good here. I think the Toyotas are just really, really strong. And Chris Buescher, I want to give a shout out to him. I don't think he'll be leading the points, but what a season he's having. It's something I never would have predicted, but I think he's going to make a deep playoff run. I'm very curious to see how the 17 team does.
Now, we've talked about 14 of the 16 drivers in the playoffs. The 2 we have yet to talk about are the Kyles. Kyle Larson has only 2 wins this season, 3 less than William Byron, his teammate, and Kyle Busch has 3 wins, the only RCR driver in the playoffs. Last year, none of the RCR cars made it out of the round of 16. So, Alex, do either one of the Kyles come off as contenders this weekend and overall championship contenders?
And also, I just want to say William Byron did win Darlington in the spring. I just fact checked that. But between the two Kyles, I think Kyle Larson's going to be a contender. He's going to be a contender throughout these whole playoffs. And I think he could definitely be contending because he's really good at Darlington as well, like I mentioned with Truex. And this is a high-line track. This is a track kind of like Homestead. Kyle Larson's definitely going to be a contender for this race unless something goes wrong. Kyle Busch is a wild card because Kyle Busch is either running in the top 5 really quiet or top 10, or he's running like 25th, and it's kind of weird. That's why I don't really have him making a far in my playoff grid. But it's both of them could, but if I had to pick one, I'd pick Kyle Larson just because of consistency. I don't think I would happily pick Kyle Busch without feeling some sort of anxiety with it.
Yeah, I have to agree. You can never really count out the Kyles. They're both obviously great at what they do, and Kyle Larson is, I think, he's obviously the more dynamic racer, but I think that he, like you said, if a highline is involved, that's the kind of racing he loves. With Kyle Busch, obviously super experienced and has proven that he's capable, but I think that he's still with his new team figuring things out, and it would be tough to pick him over Kyle Larson.